Good evening, and thank you for trusting us to deliver the chills you seek. Make yourself comfortable, though you may soon find yourself on edge. Listen carefully. Subtle sounds may signal horrors within these tales, transporting you to places where most fear to tread. Prepare yourself as darkness falls. Story 1. It has been a while since I posted a story about a suicide house, but I have had several requests for more stories about my experiences in the field of trauma scene work. If you don't know what that is, I used to lead a crew that would go in after a beep, suicide, unattended death, accidental death, fire death, or any manner of incident that caused damage to a structure that left behind a scene that the victim's family shouldn't have to see. Now, I know my stories are not scary in the haunted or serial killer type stories, but the fact is most people couldn't handle walking into a scene like many of the ones I've been on. We actually had to be very careful how we trained crew members who worked on such scenes. It was often a volunteer basis for working on those types of scenes, meaning we didn't force anyone to go to a house where the dad killed all the children before blowing his brains out in the lazy boy. We just didn't start someone in training and then go, oh, by the way, we're going to a multiple homicide anyway. If there was a way to describe some of the sights and smells of doing this type of work, I am sure you would see how truly scary or messed up this all is. First of all, I have to say that suicide is not glamorous, nor is it ever over for those around you. If you need help, please get help. Don't let your loved ones find you that way. It not only changes them, but changes the feeling inside the house. Anyway, back to my story. This took place in the late 1990s, just before I got out of the field. We got a call to dispatch a crew out to a house, and we were told that there was an incident with at least one death. Sometimes it is given to us that way, but never like a real whole story. But sometimes we saw the true story on the evening news or a neighbor that talks too much. We arrive at this house, modest house, not really a high-end home, but not a low-end either. It was a 2-story home, about midway into a cul-de-sac street. As with some scenes, there is a cluster of neighbors outside looking at who we were and why we were there. The sheriff's department had just released the scene, so all of the crime scene investigators had already done their job. As I approached the house, I noticed a ton of what looked like bullet holes in the stucco, broken glass, and a long blood stain on the driveway. We went inside and had to suit up almost immediately, as the police had probably used tear gas. There was blood stains all over it, looked like as if someone had been dragged through the house with blood gushing. There were areas that had pooled up blood, areas where things were kind of looked like explosions happened, to which I assume flashbangs were used, or maybe the guy inside had shot up. Probably what strikes you the most in situations like this is how benign the underneath looks. I don't know how to describe it, but just imagine, if you will, a place looking like the inside of a home, molded out of the TV set of Full House. Now imagine that same TV set with blood smeared and pooled, bullet holes, and tons of broken glass. I mean, they seemed like a very normal family. I remember in their living room a big blue woodcut sign that said family. You know, before live, laugh, love signs were in style. And under that sign was a bunch of family photos of kids, parents, Christmas, graduation, and vacations. Other things in the house was a wall dedicated to the dad's love of his sports teams, and pictures of him with his buddies at games and stuff. So, what happened? From what we pieced together from the news reports, neighbors who wanted to talk to us while we were cleaning his blood off the driveway, and from the scene itself, was that the dad went crazy. He had been talking about demons, not like I got my own demons, but actual demons. He was sure that he was being attacked by the devil, and that demons were trying to take the souls of his family. So rather than to let the demons take his family, he killed them, and so they would go to heaven. He ended up barricading himself in the house. It looked like some family members tried to get away after being shot and stabbed, but one collapsed in the kitchen, and one escaped somehow, and one was pulled out by the police. He ended up shooting back at the police, and the neighborhood was evacuated for blocks, not sure about all that as we arrived on scene much later. But that was what the people outside were saying. In the end, he escaped the house, ended up on the roof, still shooting back. And the police, and they shot him. He fell from the roof. And that was his blood we were cleaning from the driveway. He murdered his wife. One of his older children later died in the hospital. One of the kids was killed inside the house. One escaped. And I think another family member that lived with them was unharmed, as they were not at the house when this all went down. It took us a lot longer to clean this scene, as there were so many holes, and we had to remove almost all of the carpet and soft surfaces due to the tear gas. It was a terrible scene inside. I know this might sound religious or whatever, but come across enough of these scenes and you start to really believe evil does exist. Story 2. If you're rereading this, I am already dead. Call the police and tell them about Brian. I didn't trust Brian from the first day he joined our company. Monmart is just another soul-beep big box store that employs the broken and broke like a kid, collects magic cards, and discards the common ones just as quickly. 3 months ago, Brian walked into the Tupperware aisle with a televangelist smile, reflecting the glare of fluorescent lights, and a laser beam stare on my coworker, Jenny S. Beep, while she was leaning over picking up random trash. "Hey, I am Brian. It's really good to be working with you." Hand outstretched, he grabbed my unextended hand and shook it furiously in his sweaty palms. "I just love your vibe. I know we were going to get along freaking awesome. Sure man. Nice to meet you," I said, wiping the slime off on my jeans. "This is Who Are You Beautiful?" Brian practically yelled at Jenny. I didn't know I would be working with a celebrity. "I am not a celebrity," Jenny said. "You would be if you sent me some pics. I'd make sure everyone knew how pretty you are," while I watched this beep harassment lawsuit in front of my eyes. I caught Jenny blushing at his advances. Jenny was a good kid in her early 20s. More curves than common sense, though, and a giant hole in her heart that her dad made when he cut out of their lives more than 10 years ago. Don't get me wrong. She was a knockout on the inside and out, but I wasn't into her. For one, I was way too old for her, and two, I didn't swing that way. I had more exotic tastes. I just felt protective of her, but I wasn't her dad, and I couldn't get in the way. Over the next couple of weeks, I noticed Brian chatting her up in hardware, and I am pretty sure he made it at least a little farther with her in the break room on the overnight shift. It was what it was. I really got worried last week, though, when Brian dropped her off for her shift, and she wouldn't look me in the eyes when she clocked in. "Hey Jenny, wait up," I called, and she stopped short before leaving the back room. Her hair was down that day, brushed over the side of her neck, revealing beep dark, bruising along her jugular. "What the Jenny, what happened? Just leave me alone, will you?" She muttered through clenched teeth and stormed out of the room. The next day, Jenny didn't show up for work. 3 days later, the police asked questions, but told everyone not to worry about it. She was young and would show up. They'd seen this kind of thing before. Monday, Brian was moving in on the new girl at the store, Brandy. Same M.O. Brandy looked a lot like Jenny too. Fun and cute with a hurt she didn't quite understand yet, but left her vulnerable to assholes and predators. Pro tip: next time you go to Monmart or any of its big box competitors, look up. You see all of those round domes on the ceilings that are supposed to have cameras in them. The domes are all empty. They read just there to freak you out and deter the amateurs who don't know what they redoing. Yeah, there are a handful of security cameras all over the store. You just can't see them. You've got to know where they at. I just happened to know that the security camera in the alley behind the store had a tragic mishap with a baseball bat last night. Management is lazy. They get to that for a year. Maybe. Where is she, Beep? I slammed Brian into the brick wall next to dumpster. Who? Stop, Beep, with me. Brian threw a sloppy right eye, blocked with my left. My knee struck gold between his legs, and my right snapped his head back with an uppercut. How it feel dealing with someone your own size? Okay, man. Okay, Beep. Just give me a second. Brian stretched out his hands, placating. Let us talk about this, man. I blocked the sucker punch. He threw to my gut on my arm. I grabbed the loser by his t-shirt and slammed my forehead into his nose. Cartilage crunched and blood splattered satisfyingly where I growled, slamming his back into the brick to accentuate each word. Is she? Wouldn't you like to know, old man? Brian spat bloody spittle in my face. I saw you looking at her. You want some of that honey, too, Don T.U. I paused for just a split second. Present tense. Want some of that honey, too. I didn't think Jenny was still alive. But maybe. I never saw the box cutter until I felt the warmth trickling down my shirt. The last thing I remembered was the feel of my ribs breaking from what felt like the tip of a steel-toe boot. As my life blood bled out into the alley, Beep Brian's face the next day was priceless. I waited just outside of the break room and looked inside. Brian looked like 250 pounds of angry black man had made his face into meatloaf. I was half surprised a wuss like him would show his face at work looking like that. But of course, if he didn't show up so soon after Jenny disappeared, it might draw some suspicion his way. This was going to be awesome. There was lots of talk about. You should have seen the other guy and other Beep. Good morning, gents. I bellowed in my best bass. What a fine morning it is. The other guys groused back at me. But Brian, oh my sweet baby Jesus. Brian, his face was priceless. Good morning, Brian. I walked right past him and clocked in at the electronic time clock. It looks like you came out of the wrong side of a meat grinder. Oh, I said. Shut your mouth. You like you've seen a ghost. I walked out the door and started my shift. Later that night, I just got off of the 12-hour shift and walked into the employee parking lot at the back of the store. Invading weeds cracked through the weathered asphalt, laying claim to the land once again. I noticed my car door was open ajar, but I didn't think anything of it. Worn, cracked leather upholstery creaked in the back seat as I settled into the driver's seat. I just want to know where she is, Brian. Just tell me. It'll be easier for you. Thick blackness draped over my face, and tightness closed off my airway. I only knew the dark. Top o' the mornin', I shouted into Monmart the following day. I pulled a toothpick from my pocket and dug out pieces of dirt from my teeth. Didn't he get out that morning in the bathroom? What the beep? You can't be here. Brian screamed, spittle flying from his ruined mouth. You re-dead. You re-dead. Brian, calm down, man, I said, raising my hands in front of me, palms open. Calm down. Buddy, my muscles easily encapsulated his shoulder blow to my abdomen. A crowd of looky-loo-s of Monmart employees and customers started to surround us like a schoolyard fight. I heard someone mention calling 911. Better make this quick. I grabbed Brian S. head in a rear chokehold, pivoted his body, and beep his neck up so his ear was next to my mouth. You've got to decide very quickly, beep. I whispered into his ear, tell me where Jenny is, or I will beep haunt you every beep day of your miserable, worthless beep life. I applied just a little extra torque to the pressure points behind his jaw. RV lot, outside of town. Blue camper. He croaked. That-s a good boy. I whispered, applying just enough pressure to cut of his airway, until his body slumped in my arms. In his last moment of consciousness, I said, if she isn't T, you'll never know peace. The police arrived a minute later. Badass response time guys. I quietly slipped away in the confusion and drove to the RV parking lot outside of town. In the very far back of the lot was a broken down blue trailer. I found Jenny inside, alive. I got her to the local hospital and slipped out of the emergency room doors when the doctor walked in. She was going to be okay, but just in case, I left an envelope in her jacket that'll see her through for a few years while she recovers. So, guys, I am looking for a new place to work. Monmart is just a little too hot for me right now. Preferably somewhere that human beep likes to prowl. I've got an itch that needs scratching. Do you have any suggestions? Story 3. The first thing Sarah noticed about Oakhaven House wasn't the peeling paint or the skeletal branches scraping the attic windows. It was the silence, not an absence of sound, but a thick, muffled quiet, like the house itself was holding its breath. It swallowed the crunch of gravel under her tires, the slam of her car door, even the frantic beating of her own heart. She inherited the place from her reclusive great-aunt Mildred. A woman Sarah remembered only as a vague, papery scent and eyes that seemed to look through you. Just needs some TLC the lawyer had said, shuffling papers with a dismissive wave. Bit of a time capsule. He hadn't mentioned the suffocating stillness. The way dust motes hung suspended in the weak afternoon light, filtering through grimy leaded windows, unmoving, as if trapped in amber, or the smell, beneath the expected sense of mildew and disuse, lurked something else. A faint, cloying sweetness, like decaying lilies mixed with damp earth, and something metallic. It settled in the back of Sarah's throat. A persistent, unwelcome taste-she pushed open the heavy front door, its hinges groaning a protest that seemed unnaturally loud in the oppressive quiet. The foyer yawned before her, dominated by a grand staircase, swallowed by shadows halfway up. The wallpaper, once probably a rich burgundy damask, was now faded and peeling, revealing sickly yellow plaster beneath, like exposed flesh. The air was cold, colder than the crisp October day outside. A chill that seeped through her thin jacket and settled into her bones. Sarah spent the first day battling cobwebs and decades of dust, trying to impose order, but the silence followed her. The rhythmic scrape of her broom across the warped oak floorboards sounded flat, deadened, when she turned on an old radio she found in the kitchen. Static hissed weakly for a moment, then died completely. Her phone had no signal. The isolation felt less like solitude, and more like being sealed inside a tomb that night. The sounds began. Sarah lay rigid in the unfamiliar, musty-smelling four-poster bed in what had been Mildred's room. The silence had deepened, becoming a physical presence pressing down on her chest. Then, faintly at first, a scritch-scratch echoed from the hallway, like fingernails, long and brittle, dragging slowly along the wall. Her breath hitched. Rats, she told herself firmly. Old houses have rats, but the sound had an unnerving deliberation, a slow, exploratory cadence that felt aware it, stopped directly outside her. Dorsey held her breath, straining her ears against the thick silence. Nothing. Minutes stretched into an agonizing eternity. Just as she began to relax, a new sound came. A low, wet drip, drip, drip. Slow, irregular. It seemed to originate from the ceiling above her bed. Craning her neck, she peered upwards into the gloom. Nothing. No stain. Just the dark, water-stained plaster. Yet the sound persisted, each drop landing with a soft, fleshy impact on an unseen surface. The metallic tang in the air seemed to strengthen sleep. Was impossible. Every creak of the settling house, every rustle of wind outside, was amplified, distorted. The silence between sounds became a taut wire, humming with anticipation. She felt watched, not from outside the windows, but from within the walls, from the shadows pooling in the corners of the high ceiling. The peeling wallpaper patterns seemed to shift in the moonlight, forming fleeting, grotesque faces that vanished when she blinked the next day. Exhaustion dragged at her limbs. The dripping sound had vanished with the dawn, leaving only the pervasive quiet and the cloying sweet decay smell, while clearing out a junk-filled closet under the stairs. She found a small, leather-bound journal tucked behind a stack of moth-eaten blankets. Mildred S. journaled the entries, started mundanely weather reports, grocery lists, but as Sarah flipped through the brittle pages, Mildred S. neat script began to deteriorate, becoming spidery, frantic. October 12th. The quiet is worse today. Like cotton wool stuffed in my ears. Can't he hear the birds? Did they stop singing? Or can I no longer hear them? October 19th. The scratching came again last night. Not outside. Inside the walls. It whispers my name. Mildred, Mildred, in a voice, like dry leaves scraping together. Henry says, I am imagining things. Henry, doesn't he hear it? Henry, doesn't he smell the earth? October 27th. The dripping started. Above the bed. Henry says it s the pipes. But there are no pipes there. I looked. It smells like rust. Like old pennies. Like blood. Sarah S. hands trembled. Henry was Mildred S. husband, who had died decades before Sarah was born. According to family lore, he passed peacefully in his sleep. The entries grew more disjointed, more terrifying. November 3rd. It s not the house. It s me. It s always been me. The quiet it s inside my head. The thing in the walls, it s hungry. It feeds on the silence, on the fear. It says it s been waiting, waiting for the blood. November 10th. I see it now, in the corner of my eye, a shadow darker than the others. It doesn't move like a shadow should. It flows. It has teeth. Or are they thorns? It smells so sweet, like rot, like the garden after the frost. The final entry was a single, shaky line. The ink blurred as if by tears, or something else. It s in the blood. Oh God, it s in the blood. It wakes when the quiet falls. It knows my name. It knows all our names. Sarah slammed the journal shut, her heart hammering against her ribs. It s in the blood, the phrase echoed in her mind, chilling her more than the house s unnatural cold. Was it madness, a family curse, or something far older, far hungrier, woven into their very lineage that night? The dread was a tangible thing, coiling in her stomach. She tried to stay awake, clutching a heavy flashlight like a club. The silence descended earlier, heavier than before. The scritch-scratch returned, louder this time, tracing a path along the hallway wall, pausing outside her door. Then, The wet drip, drip, drip started above her bed again. Faster now, more insistent than, came the breathing not her own. A slow, ragged inhalation, followed by a wet, rattling exhale. It came from the corner of the room, near the heavy velvet curtains. Sarah froze, every muscle locked. She strained her eyes, but the darkness there was absolute, a pool of ink. The breathing grew louder, closer. It carried the same cloying sweetness, now thick with the coppery tang of blood. She could feel the displaced air as it moved, a subtle shift in the pressure of the room. A cold draft that brushed her cheek, a low, guttural sound, vibrated through the floorboards. A sound that wasn't a growl, wasn't a moan, but something obscenely in between. It formed a single word, dragged from a throat not meant for human speech. Ssera. Paralyzing terror seized her. It knew her name, just like it knew Mildred S. It S in the blood. The revelation slammed into her, cold and absolute. This wasn't just some haunted house. This thing, this presence that fed on silence and fear. It was hereditary. It lived in the quiet places within them. Mildred hadn't been imagining it. She'd been hosting it. And now, with the silence of Oakhaven, with Sarah S.'s own fear and isolation, it was waking inside her. The dripping sound intensified, becoming a steady patter. A dark stain bloomed on the ceiling above her bed, spreading rapidly. Not water, thick, viscous, and black in the gloom. It gathered, forming a single heavy drop that stretched, elongated, and fellet landed with a soft splat on the quilt beside her thigh. Not water, not blood, something thick, tarry, and impossibly cold. It seemed to writhe faintly on the fabric, absorbing the weak moonlight. The smell of decay and pennies became overwhelming, making her gag the breathing. Was right beside the bed now. Sarah squeezed her eyes shut, tears streaming down her face. She could feel its presence, a cold, palpable void inches away. It radiated a profound, ancient hunger, a craving not for flesh, but for the essence of fear, for the stillness of a soul surrendering to despair. The quiet, the voice rasped, closer than before, the words forming directly in her mind rather than her ears. Your quiet is so delicious, sweeter than Mildred S. Riper a wave of icy cold washed over her, sinking deep into her marrow. It carried images, fleeting, horrific glimpses. Mildred, much younger, eyes wide with terror, trapped in this same room. Her grandfather, Henry, not peaceful in sleep, but his face contorted in silent agony. Eyes staring sightlessly as shadows pooled in his mouth. Generations back. Faces she didn't recognize, all sharing the same hollow-eyed dread, all dying in this house, in this suffocating silence, not victims of happenstance, but offerings, fuel. It wakes when the quiet falls, Mildred had written, but it wasn't just the house's quiet. It was the quiet within the inheritor, the loneliness, the isolation, the fear that grew in the absence of sound and connection. That was its cradle. That was its larder skeletal coldness. Like the touch of dead leaves, brushed the back of her hand, resting on the quilt. Where it touched, a numbness spread, a chilling void that felt less like absence and more like an invasion. It was probing, tasting her terror Sarah, as survival instinct screamed. She couldn't fight this, not physically, but maybe she could break the silence, fill the void it needed. With a gasp that tore from her raw throat, she screamed, a raw, ragged sound, shattering the oppressive quiet like glass. The effect was immediate, but not what she hoped. The breathing hitched. The presence recoiled, not in pain, but in irritation, disappointment. The cold touch vanished. The dripping sound stopped abruptly. The heavy breathing receded back towards the shadowed corner silence, crashed back down. Heavier than ever, thicker, angrier. The scream hadn't banished it. It had merely annoyed it. And now, the silence wasn't just empty. It was charged, humming with a predatory awareness. The shadows in the corner deepened, swirling like oil on water. She could feel its attention, focused solely on her. A cold, calculating gaze that stripped away pretense. It had tasted her fear. It knew her name. It knew her blood end now. It knew her voice wouldn't save her Sarah, huddled under the quilt. The spot where the terry drop had fallen, radiating unnatural cold. The Journal S final line echoed in the suffocating quiet. A truth more horrifying than any ghost story. It wakes when the quiet falls. The silence wasn't just the house S condition. It was the thing S domain, its hunting ground. And she, Sarah, with Mildred S blood in her veins, was both the prey and the unwitting caretaker of its lair. The house wasn't haunted. She was outside. The wind moaned against the windows. A mournful sound that only emphasized the crushing silence within Oakhaven. The scratching began again on the door. Slower this time, deliberate, tracing patterns, waiting. The quiet deepened, becoming a tangible weight. A living thing pressing down, listening. The shadows by the curtains pulsed, darker than darkness, holding a shape that defied the eye, a shape that breathed with the rhythm of a nightmare. Sarah knew, with a certainty that froze her soul, that the silence wouldn't lift again, not truly, and when it deepened completely, when her own terror finally choked her into absolute stillness, that S, when it would feed, that's when it would claim what was in the blood. Oakhaven House held its breath, and Sarah, trapped within its suffocating embrace, understood the terrible inheritance she could never escape. The quiet had fallen. and it was waiting. Story 4. The silence of the Grey Rock Lighthouse wasn't an absence of sound, but a heavy, damp blanket that muffled the world. Alara Vance felt it press against her eardrums. The moment the supply boat's engine faded into the perpetual fog bank that clung to the jagged, black teeth of the coastline. 30 days. Alone. The previous keeper, Old Man Hemlock, had simply vanished. The official report cited probable misadventure, a polite term for a stumble into the hungry, freezing Atlantic. But the way the Coast Guard officer had avoided her eyes, the tight set of his jaw as he handed over the heavy, tarnished keys, spoke of something less accidental. The lighthouse itself was a gaunt, granite finger thrust defiantly against the elements, perched on a barren, wave-lashed islet accessible only by a treacherously narrow causeway submerged at high tide. It was the definition of isolation. Inside, the air tasted of salt, damp stone, and the faint, metallic tang of old machinery oil, the rhythmic, mechanical clunk-thump of the massive rotating lamp in the lantern room high above, became the heartbeat of her solitary world. The first week was manageable, almost pleasant. Alara, seeking solitude after a shattering personal loss, had volunteered for the posting. She organized supplies, familiarized herself with the temperamental diesel generator in the echoing basement, and meticulously logged weather observations. She read by the hissing glow of a kerosene lamp in the small keeper's quarters, the wind moaning like a lost soul around the thick walls, the vastness of the empty ocean, visible only in fleeting, fog-shrouded glimpses, was initially calming. A blank slate then, the other sounds began. Not the wind, not the waves crashing far below. These were inside, soft, hesitant scrapes against the spiral staircase, iron steps, like fingernails dragging on metal, a faint, rhythmic tapping on the thick glass of the lantern room door. When she was up there, tending the lamp, a sound that stopped instantly when she whipped around, heart hammering against her ribs. Once, in the dead of night, a distinct, wet sigh seemed to come from the corner of her room, smelling faintly of brine and rot. She'd lain frozen, clutching her blanket, until dawn painted the fog a sickly gray solitude. Once a bomb began to curdle. The silence between the mechanical beats of the lamp stretched into voids where her own thoughts grew loud and unwelcome. Was it the wind whistling through a cracked seal, settling stone, or something else? The isolation amplified every creak, every groan of the ancient structure. The lighthouse wasn't just her home. It felt like a living, breathing entity watching her, its thick walls weren't protection anymore. They were a cage, a stone throat trapping her. With whatever shared the space, she started talking to herself, narrating mundane tasks just to hear a human voice. Her reflection in the tarnished brass fixtures looked gaunt, eyes shadowed. Sleep became fractured, haunted by dreams of drowning in icy, black water, pulled down by unseen hands. She de-awake gasping, convinced the damp chill permeating the stone wasn't just the sea air, but a physical presence leeching her warmth one evening during a howling gale that shook the tower's foundations. The generator in the basement sputtered and died. Darkness plunged in, absolute and suffocating. Only the intermittent, sweeping beam from the lamp above sliced through the blackness of the stairwell. Alara fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight, her hands trembling. The beam cut a frail cone of light. As she descended the slick, spiral steps into the generator room, the air down there was thick with the smell of diesel and damp earth. The beam of her flashlight danced over pipes, gauges, and the hulking shape of the generator. As she approached, the light caught something pale and glistening on the concrete floor near the fuel intake valve. Seaweed, thick, slimy strands of kelp, impossibly fresh, smelling of the deep ocean. They hadn't been there hours before. Her breath hitched. How? The basement was sealed, accessed only through the tower itself. The pounding of the waves against the islet's base seemed louder down here. A hungry, insistent rhythm as she bent to inspect the generator. The flashlight beam flickered. Not a battery issue. It pulsed, dimming and brightening in time with the rotating lamp far above. In the strobing darkness, she saw movement. Not a shape exactly, more like a distortion in the air near the far wall. A patch of deeper shadow that seemed to ripple, absorbing the light. A coldness, sharper than the basement chill, radiated from it. She felt a prickle on her neck. The distinct sensation of being watched from that shifting darkness panic, cold and sharp, shot through her. She dropped the flashlight. It clattered on the concrete, the beam spinning wildly, casting lunatic shadows that danced like grasping hands. In that chaotic light, for a fraction of a second, she saw a face, pale, waterlogged, with eyes like black pits, reflecting no light, peering from the wall near the seaweed. It was there, then gone, swallowed by the spinning shadows as the flashlight rolled to a stop. Beam pointing uselessly at the ceiling, Alara scrambled backwards, gasping, her back hitting the cold iron of the staircase. She didn't bother with the generator. She fled up the stairs, slipping on the damp steps. The image of those empty, reflective eyes burned into her mind. Was it a trick of the light, a figment born of exhaustion and fear? Or had she seen what claimed Old Man Hemlock? The days blurred into a haze of dread. The malevolence wasn't always visible, but it was felt. A sudden, freezing draft in a sealed room. The faint, coppery taste of blood in her mouth when there was none. Whispers that weren't quite words, just sibilant hisses that seemed to come from the stones themselves. Echoing the ocean's sigh, she found her journal entries becoming erratic, the handwriting shaky, filled with paranoid scribbles about the wet thing in the walls. And the tower's hunger. She stopped going down to the basement entirely, rationing the fuel for the lamp, letting the generator lie silent. The darkness below felt like an open wound in the lighthouse's foundation food, lost its taste. Sleep was impossible without the heavy oil lamp burning beside her bed. Its small flame, a fragile defiance against the encroaching dark. She started seeing things at the edge of her vision, fleeting, gray shapes darting behind doorways, reflections in the window glass that weren't her own, just a smudge of wetness on the pane. The isolation wasn't just physical now, it was mental. She was marooned, not just on a rock, but within the crumbling fortress of her own sanity. Was the presence real, feeding on her fear in this desolate place? Or was the solitude, the crushing weight of the sea and the stone, simply unraveling her mind, conjuring horrors from the depths of her own grief and despair? The uncertainty was the worst torture. Every unexplained sound, every chill, every flicker of shadow became a potential confirmation of the external threat, or damning evidence of her internal collapse one night. The storm returned with apocalyptic fury. Waves like black mountains slammed into the islet, shaking the lighthouse to its core. The wind screamed like a chorus of the damned, finding every crack and crevice to howl through. Rain lashed the thick glass of the lantern room like shrapnel. Alara huddled in the keeper-s quarters, wrapped in blankets, the kerosene lamp guttering violently, the rhythmic clunk-thump of the lamp mechanism above seemed labored, strained then. It stopped silence, not the usual muffled silence, but a sudden, deafening void. The storm still raged outside, but the cessation of the lighthouse's heartbeat was horrifying. Without the lamp, ships were blind. Without the light, she was utterly, irrevocably alone in the dark. With a Tenu sound replaced the mechanism's beat, a slow, wet dragging coming from the spiral staircase. Squelch, drag, squelch, drag. It was ascending, getting closer. Terror, pure and icy, locked her muscles. She fumbled for the heavy poker beside the small iron stove, her knuckles white. The dragging sound reached the landing outside her door. Stop silence again, thick and expectant. The storm's fury seemed muted, as if the world held its breath. Alara stared at the thick oak door, the iron bolt drawn. Was it out there? Or was she finally completely mad? A faint, wet tapping began on the door. Not knuckles. It sounded like fingers. Cold, slippery fingers then. A voice. Low, gurgling, as if spoken through lungs full of seawater. It was horribly familiar. It was her voice. Alara, it rasped, the sound bubbling unpleasantly. It's cold out here in the dark. Let me in. Her blood turned to ice. This wasn't a hallucination. This was impossible. This was her. The voice came again, closer now, as if the speaker was pressing against the wood. You're not alone. Not really. We've been waiting, the tower remembers. It always collects its keepers. A violent tremor shook the lighthouse. Plaster dust rained from the ceiling. Outside the thick windows, illuminated by a sudden, unnatural flash of greenish lightning. She saw the churning ocean, but it wasn't just waves. Shapes seemed to writhe beneath the surface, elongated, sinuous things that broke the foam for a second before plunging back into the black depths. Were they real? Or was the storm, the fear, the voice, finally shattering her perception? The dragging sound started again, moving past her door, heading upwards, towards the dark. Silent lantern roommate desperate. Animal instinct overrode her paralysis. She couldn't stay trapped down here. She had to see. She had to know. With the poker held like a talisman, she unbolted the door. The screech of the iron loud in the sudden quiet of the hallway. The corridor was empty, smelling strongly of ozone and the sea. Wet footprints, glistening faintly in the gloom, led up the spiral stairs. They weren't human footprints. They were elongated, webbed, ending, in points ignoring every screaming instinct for self-preservation. Driven by a horrifying need to confront the source of the voice, she followed, step by trembling step, up the iron staircase slick, with an oily residue that smelled of low tide and decay. The air grew colder with each revolution. The sound of the storm below replaced by a new sound, a low, resonant humming that seemed to vibrate through the stone. Itself she reached the heavy iron door to the lantern room. It stood slightly ajar. Beyond, only darkness. The storm clouds blotted out the moon and stars. The massive Fresnel lens, usually a complex jewel of light, was a dead, black eye taking a shuddering breath. Alara pushed the door open wider. The humming was louder here, emanating from the very structure. The wind howled through the broken panes, where the storm had breached the glass. Rain lashed in, stinging her face at first, she saw nothing, just the oppressive dark and the skeletal outline of the lamp mechanism. Then movement. Near the central column, where the lamp should rotate, a figure stood, silhouetted against the storm-lashed night sky visible. Through a shattered painted was her, or a grotesque parody of her, the same height, the same build, but the hair hung in wet, lank strands like seaweed. The clothes were identical to what she wore now, but sodden, clinging to a form that seemed subtly wrong, boneless, shifting. The figure was facing away, looking out at the raging sea as Alara watched, frozen in the doorway. The figure slowly turned the face, was a waterlogged nightmare. Her features, but bloated, pale as a drowned corpse. The eyes were the worst knot pits of blackness like in the basement. But her own eyes, wide and terrified, yet filled with a terrible, ancient knowing. Salt water dripped from its chin, pattering onto the floor. It smiled, a rictus that stretched the skin unnaturally, revealing dark gaps where teeth should be. It has time, the thing wearing her face gurgled. Its voice, a perfect mimicry, layered over the sound of churning water. The light needs feeding, and the watchers below grow impatient. It took a step towards her, leaving a trail of wet, glistening footprints on the metal floor. The humming in the stone intensified, becoming a physical pressure against Alara's skull. She raised the poker, but her arm felt leaden, weak. The figure's smile widened, impossibly. "Dante, you see," it whispered, the sound seeming to come from all around her now, echoing the wind and the waves. The solitude, the fear, it's not just you. It's the tower. It drinks it. It thrives on the loneliness of its keepers. It creates the watchers, or perhaps it calls them. Hemlock understood eventually. He joined them another step closer. The stench of decay and deep ocean was overwhelming. Alara stumbled back, her back hitting the cold iron doorframe. The storm outside seemed to focus. Waves crashing against the base of the tower with renewed fury, shaking the platform beneath her feet. Through the broken glass, she saw them again, the sinuous shapes in the water, closer now, writhing just beneath the surface, drawn to the silent tower. Were they waiting? Or were they part of the tower itself? The figure that was her, yet wasn't, tilted its head. You thought you sought solitude. The tower chose you. It smelled your grief, your emptiness perfect fuel. Now the light must shine again. But a different light, the humming reached a fever pitch, vibrating in Alara's teeth. The massive lens assembly above them groaned, with a sound of protesting metal and shattering glass. The dead lamp suddenly flared to life, not its usual white beam, but a sickly, pulsating green, it cut through the storm, not as a beacon of safety, but as a predatory searchlight, sweeping across the churning black water where the shapes now breached the surface, indistinct and monstrous, turning their heads towards the ghastly green radiance the thing wearing her face lunged, not with violence, but with a terrifying liquid speed, cold, impossibly strong hands, smelling of brine and grave dirt, clamped onto her shoulders. Its drowned face was inches from hers. Those terrified yet knowing eyes staring into her soul. "Dawn tea fight," it whispered, its breath like a cold fog. "The fall is quick, and then you become part of the light, part of the watch." Forever it pulled her towards the shattered window, towards the railing slick with rain, and that strange, oily residue. The green light bathed them both, casting long, distorted shadows that danced like the things in the water below. The humming wasn't just in the stone anymore. It was inside her head, a seductive thrum promising an end to the fear, the solitude, the unbearable weight of being alone. Alara struggled, but the strength was leaching from her, replaced by the cold radiating from the thing and the hypnotic pulse of the green light. Below, the waves crashed and the watchers waited. The lighthouse, her prison and her tomb, thrummed with ancient alien power. The malevolent presence wasn't just external or internal anymore. It was the tower, it was the sea, and now it was wearing her face, pulling her into the hungry dark, and the sickly green glow the last thing she heard, as the icy grip tightened, and the edge of the abyss yawned before her, was the gurgling voice, her voice, whispering with dreadful finality, "Welcome home." Story 5. The rain started the moment I unlocked the front door of the old Henderson place. Not a welcoming drizzle, but a sudden, lashing downpour that seemed to come from nowhere, hammering the slate roof like frantic fists. It was the first sound in the oppressive silence that had greeted me since the moving truck left hours ago, leaving me alone with the echoing emptiness and the pervasive smell of dust and disuse. My new home, my fresh start, or so I told myself, ignoring the low price, and the realtor averted eyes the house. Didn't he creak? It sighed, long, drawn-out exhalations that seemed to come from deep within the walls, coinciding with the flickering of the single bulb ID managed to get working in the cavernous hallway. Each sigh brought with it a wave of cold air, smelling faintly of damp earth, and something else, something metallic, like old pennies left in the rain. I chalked it up to ancient pipes and settled nerves, alone in a big, unfamiliar house, classic recipe for jitters, but the unease deepened, settling into my bones like the chill from the stone floors. It wasn't just the size or the flickering lights. It was the stillness, an unnatural quiet that pressed in, thick and suffocating, the usual comforting sounds of a neighborhood settling for the night distant traffic. A barking dog were absent, swallowed by the rain, and the house's own insistent silence, my own breathing, sounded unnervingly loud that first night. I woke to the sound of footsteps, not the scampering of rodents, but deliberate, heavy thuds on the stairs, slow, measured, ascending. My blood turned to ice. I lay frozen, heart hammering against my ribs, straining to listen over the frantic drumming in my ears. The footsteps reached the landing outside my bedroom door, stopped. The silence that followed was worse than the sound, a waiting silence. I could feel it, a tangible presence pressing against the thin wood. I didn't dare move, didn't dare breathe. Minutes crawled by. Then the footsteps descended again, just as slowly, fading into the depths of the house. Sleep was impossible. I spent the hours until dawn staring at the crack under the door, convinced I saw a sliver of deeper darkness shift there the next day. I tried to rationalize. Settling timbers, wind catching loose shingles, anything but the horrifying certainty that someone or something had climbed those stairs. The daylight, filtering weakly through grimy windows, seemed to mock my fear. Yet the house felt different. The air hung heavier, colder. The dust motes danced in the weak light, like agitated spirits, and the smell, the metallic tang, was stronger now. Underlying the dust, coppery and thick-eye, explored the basement. A decision fueled by bravado, and the desperate need to prove the house held only mundane horrors. The stairs groaned under my weight, the wood spongy and damp. The air below was frigid and smelled overwhelmingly of wet stone, and that persistent, unsettling iron scent, the single bulb dangling from the ceiling, cast long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe at the edge of my vision. In the far corner, behind a stack of mildewed crates, I found it. Not bones, not evidence of a crime, but something profoundly wrong. Scratched into the concrete floor, crude but unmistakable, was a symbol, a circle bisected by a jagged line, surrounded by smaller, frantic-looking marks. It looked old, yet the concrete around it felt unnaturally cold to the touch, as if the chill emanated from the mark itself. Touching it sent a jolt of pure, icy dread up my arm. I stumbled back, my rationalizations crumbling. This wasn't settling. This wasn't when the psychological unraveling began subtly. I put my keys on the kitchen counter, turn my back, and they be gone. I find them minutes later in the freezer. Ice already forming on the metal, a framed photo of my parents. The only one I had was found face down on the floor one morning. The glass cracked in a perfect spiderweb pattern, radiating from their smiling faces. Paranoia became a constant companion. Every reflection in a darkened window seemed to hold a flicker of movement just behind me. Every whisper of the settling house sounded like a breath. On my neck the worst was the whispering. It started faintly, like radio static bleeding through from another frequency. Indistinct murmurs that seemed to come from the walls themselves, particularly near the basement door. At first, I couldn't make out words, just a low, insistent susurration that raised the hairs on my arms. Then one rain-lashed night, as I huddled under a blanket in the living room, the single lamp flickering wildly, the whispers coalesced into a single, chilling phrase, spoken in a voice that wasn't quite human, a dry rasp, like dead leaves scraping together. He sees you now, terror, cold and absolute, seized me. I wasn't imagining it. This wasn't stress. The house was alive, and it knew me. The sense of being watched intensified. A constant, oppressive pressure between my shoulder blades. Sleep became a battleground. Dreams were fractured. Nonsensical horrors filled with distorted faces. And the feeling of falling endlessly into that cold, marked concrete floor in the basement. I wake gasping, drenched in cold sweat, the echoes of the whispers still ringing in my ears, the metallic smell thick in my nostrils. My reflection in the bathroom mirror began to look subtly, wrong eyes too shadowed, mouth set in a grim line. I didn't remember forming. Was it exhaustion? Or was something changing me? The final revelation came not in a dream, but in the stark, terrifying reality of the hallway mirror. It was late. The rain had finally stopped, leaving an eerie stillness, broken only by the house's rhythmic sighs. I'd gotten up for water, my nerves frayed to breaking point, as I passed the large, ornate mirror hanging near the stairs. A flicker of movement caught my eye, not behind me, within the reflection. I froze, my blood turning to sludge. In the dim light, my reflection stood perfectly still, but beside it, slightly overlapping, was another figure, taller, gaunt. Its features were blurred, indistinct, like a face seen through frosted glass, yet radiating a profound malevolence. It wore tattered, dark rags that seemed to blend with the shadows clinging to the edges of the mirror, and it was staring directly at me. Not at the reflection, the horror, wasn't just the sight. It was the recognition, a jolt of pure, instinctive terror shot through me, followed by a chilling, unwelcome sense of familiarity. This thing wasn't just a ghost or a demon. It felt like a part of the house, an entity woven into its very foundations, and looking into those blurred, shadowed eyes, I felt a terrifying echo within myself, a dark potential, a capacity for the kind of emptiness that could fill this place. The figure in the mirror, didn't he move? It simply stood, its blurred face inches from my reflection's shoulder, then slowly, impossibly, its mouth stretched into a rictus grin, revealing rows of shadowy, needle-like teeth. A sound escaped it, not a whisper this time, but a dry, rattling chuckle that seemed to vibrate the floorboards beneath my feet. It felt like insects crawling inside my skull. The revelation crashed over me, cold and suffocating. The house hadn't chosen me randomly. It hadn't just been waiting for anyone. It had been waiting for me. It recognized the void I'd been trying to outrun, the darkness I carried inside after the failures, the losses, the gnawing loneliness I'd tried to bury. With this fresh start, the entity in the mirror wasn't just an inhabitant. It was a reflection of my own despair, my own capacity for desolation, given form and twisted by the malignant energy of this place, the Henderson place, Wasson-T, haunted by ghosts of the past. It was a crucible that amplified the darkness within those who dwelled within it, feeding on their fear and despair until it shaped them, consumed them, made them part of its own bleak tapestry. The figure lifted one impossibly long, shadow-clad finger and pointed it directly at my chest through the glass. The air crackled with static, sharp with the smell of ozone and decay. The single bulb overhead flared once, blindingly bright, then died completely, plunging the hallway into absolute darkness. But I could still feel it, the presence, the cold, the malevolent intelligence, focused solely on me in the suffocating blackness. The dry chuckle came again, closer now, seeming to emanate from just behind my left ear, a voice devoid of warmth or life, scraped against my mind, bypassing my ears entirely. Welcome home. We've been so hungry. The footsteps started again on the stairs, slow, deliberate, ascending. This time, they didn't stop at the landing. They continued down the hallway, towards my door, towards me, trapped in the consuming dark. The smell of wet earth and old blood thick in my throat. The chilling truth resonated deeper than any physical horror. The greatest terror wasn't the entity in the mirror. It was the horrifying realization that a part of me, the part shaped by loss and echoing with that same emptiness, recognized the entity not just as a monster, but as kin, and it was answering the call. The footsteps stopped outside my door. The knob began, slowly, silently, to turn. The darkness wasn't empty anymore. It was full of teeth, and they were smiling. Story 6. The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. It hammered against the old leaded windows of Brackenwood House, a relentless percussion that seeped into the bones of Silas Thorne, the house's sole occupant and reluctant archivist. He was here to catalog the sprawling, chaotic library left behind by his reclusive great-uncle, Alastair. The task felt Herculean, buried under layers of dust, and the peculiar melancholy of a house too large for one man the unease began subtly, almost imperceptibly, beneath the drumming rain. It was a sensation Silas initially attributed to the isolation and the oppressive weight of the storm, a feeling of being watched, specifically from the high, shadowed corners of the library's vaulted ceiling. He did glance up, squinting into the gloom, seeing nothing but cobwebs trembling in unseen drafts. Yet the prickling on the back of his neck remained. Then came the headaches, not ordinary tension headaches, but a deep, throbbing pressure behind his eyes, accompanied by a low, resonant hum he couldn't pinpoint. It seemed to vibrate within the stone walls, a frequency just below hearing that set his teeth on edge. He found himself tracing the intricate, nonsensical patterns carved into the library's massive oak beam spirals that ended abruptly. Angles that shouldn't connect. Symbols that looked vaguely familiar, yet utterly alien. Uncle Alastair's notes, scrawled in a frantic hand, referred cryptically to the listeners. And the angles outside one damp afternoon, battling the headache, Silas pulled down a heavy, leather-bound tome titled Chronoscapes and Non-Euclidean Phenomena. As he opened it, a brittle, yellowed page fluttered out. It wasn't paper, but something thinner, almost translucent, like dried skin. The script wasn't any language Silas recognized. It consisted of sharp, angular glyphs that seemed to squirm under his gaze. Looking at them directly intensified the pressure in his skull. Yet when he looked away, their impossible geometries lingered burned onto his retinas. He shoved the page back into the book, his fingers tingling unpleasantly that night. The power flickered, not unusual for the old house during a storm, but the darkness that followed felt different, thicker, more occupied. Silas lit an oil lamp, its meager light pushing back the shadows only a few feet. As he walked down the long corridor towards the kitchen, the lamplight cast his distorted shadow ahead. He he stopped. His shadow stopped. Then, for a fraction of a second, it continued moving without him, elongating impossibly, its head twisting at an unnatural angle to look back at him before snapping back into place. Silas froze, his breath catching. A trick of the light, the storm, fatigue. He repeated the mantra. But the chill settling in his stomach felt heavier than the damp ere the manifestations grew bolder. He defined puddles of freezing water on the library floor, far from any leak, smelling faintly of ozone and something metallic, like old blood. The humming intensified, sometimes resolving into a faint, guttural whispering that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. Just beyond comprehension, words slithered at the edge of hearing. Beyond the angle, time is the wound. We taste your fear. He started seeing things in his peripheral vision, fleeting movements, like vast, segmented shadows detaching from the corners and skittering across the ceiling. Gone when he turned his head. Sleep became impossible. The pressure behind his eyes was constant. A physical weight pushing inwards, he delved deeper into Alistair S. notes, desperate for an explanation, for some kind of defense. The old man S. writings grew increasingly fragmented, terrified. He spoke of an entity he called the one who waits in the angle of time, not a ghost, not a demon, but something older, vaster, fundamentally other. It existed outside linear time, perceiving past, present, and future simultaneously as facets of a single, monstrous geometry. It wasn't malevolent in a human sense. It simply was, and its very presence warped reality like gravity warps light. It perceived humanity as fleeting motes of sensation, flickers of fear and awareness to be savored, like insects caught in amber. Alistair believed the house, built on peculiar ley lines, or perhaps incorporating stones from an older, stranger place, was a weak point, an angle, where this entity could perceive, and occasionally touch. Silas read, horrified, about the subtle signs, the feeling of observation, the resonant hum, the sound of its attention, the impossible geometries, the whispering, the echo of its thoughts, brushing against our dimension. Alistair described the headaches as the pressure of its regard, the feeling of being watched as its eye passing over you. He wrote of how escape was futile. The entity didn't chase. It existed around its prey, folding space and time. Running only took you deeper into its labyrinthine cold certainty, settled over Silas. This wasn't madness. This wasn't the storm. He was trapped within the perception of something unimaginably ancient and alien. It was studying him, tasting his escalating terror like a connoisseur savoring a rare vintage. The climax came on the fourth night. The storm raged with renewed fury. Silas huddled in the library. The oil lamp, his only shield against the suffocating darkness. The whispering was constant now, a sussurrating chorus inside his skull. Silas, see the angle, see the truth. The pressure behind his eyes was agony. Threatening to burst his skull, he looked up, drawn against his will to the high corner where the feeling of being watched was strongest. The darkness there seemed wrong, not just an absence of light, but a solid thing, a pool of liquid obsidian that absorbed the lamplight. Within it, for a horrifying instant, Silas saw something, not a shape, but a suggestion of impossible angles intersecting, of fractal depths that made his mind recoil. It wasn't an eye, but the concept of observation made manifest, and within that non-shape he saw himself, not a reflection, but multiple versions. Silas reading the page, Silas seeing the shadow, Silas right now looking up in terror, and Silas running down a rain-slicked road, screaming, past, present, and future, held simultaneously in that monstrous regard. The lamp guttered wildly. In the strobing light, the shadows in the room didn't just deepen, they changed. They stretched and coiled with impossible physics, becoming sharp-edged geometries that crawled across the walls and floor like living theorems. The whispering crescendoed into a deafening roar of static and guttural syllables that bypassed his ears and vibrated directly in his bones. We see you, Silas Thorn, we taste your now. Your then. Your soon terror, pure and absolute, overrode everything. He had to escape. Logic screamed Alistair's warning. Escape is futile, but primal instinct demanded flight. He bolted from the library, stumbling through the pitch-black corridors. The house seemed alive, shifting around him. Doorways led to impossible spaces. A glimpse of the library he just left from a different angle. A hallway stretched into infinity. The whispering pursued him, echoing from the walls, the floorboards, the very air. Run, little now. Run into the fold. He burst through the heavy front door into the lashing rain. The wind tore at him, the cold water shocking his skin. He ran, slipping on the gravel drive, driven only by the desperate need to put distance between himself and that impossible presence in the house. He reached his car, fumbling with frozen fingers for the keys. He jammed them into the lock, yanked the door open, and threw himself inside, slamming it shut. He locked the doors, gasping for breath. The drumming rain on the roof, a frantic counterpoint to the thunder of his heart. Safe. Outside. Away. He pressed his forehead against the cold steering wheel, trying to calm the frantic hammering in his chest. The oppressive pressure in his head began to recede, the whispering fading to a distant, almost imagined hum. He dared to look up. Out the rain-streaked windshield his blood froze. He wasn't on the driveway. He was parked directly in front of Brackenwood House. The massive, dark silhouette loomed against the stormlit sky, its windows like empty, watching sockets. The gravel beneath his tires was the same patch he'd slipped on moments before. He hadn't moved an inch. A low, resonant hum vibrated through the car's chassis, a sound deeper than the engine could ever make. It was the same hum from the library, the sound of attention. In the rearview mirror, the back seat was empty, but the glass itself, the reflection, wasn't just the dark interior of the car. Superimposed over it, faintly, impossibly, he saw the high corner of the library, and within that reflected darkness, the suggestion of impossible angles. Watching Silas slowly turned his head, dread an icy river in his veins, and looked up through the passenger window towards the house's highest window. A shape darker than the storm-laden night filled the frame, not a figure, but a fold in reality, a geometric impossibility that drank the faint light. The whispering returned, not from outside, but inside the car, inside his own mind, calm and horribly intimate. Nowhere to run. Silas Thorn, we have you. We have your now. We have your then. We will have your soon. The angle is closed. The engine wouldn't start. The door locks clicked down. Outside, the rain continued to fall. But Silas knew, with a chilling certainty that settled into his marrow, that it wasn't just water hitting the roof anymore. The storm had teeth, and it was patiently waiting for him to understand that the only escape was into a geometry of time and perception, where escape had never been anything but a cruel illusion. The house watched, the angle held, and Silas Thorn was forever caught within its impossible, hungry gaze. Story 7. The salt spray tasted like tears on Elias' lips as he secured the last shutter against the howling gale. Below, the North Atlantic churned, a living beast hammering its fists against the granite bones of Scary Rock. The lighthouse beam, normally a comforting sweep against the darkness, felt feeble tonight, swallowed almost instantly by the impenetrable fog that had rolled in with unnatural speed. It had been 18 days since the last supply boat, 18 days of wind-scoured solitude. Scary Rock wasn't just remote. It was a deliberate exile, a mile-wide moat of treacherous currents, and submerged fangs separated Illy from the mainland, making it unreachable by anything smaller than a determined warship. The lighthouse itself was a Victorian relic. All cold stone, groaning timbers, and the pervasive smell of damp wool, brine, and the faint, underlying tang of kerosene. Its isolation was its purpose, and now, Illy felt, its prison the first strangeness was subtle, a persistent, dripping sound in the lower storeroom, where no pipe ran. He de-checked, flashlight beam slicing the dusty gloom, finding only dry stone and undisturbed crates, yet the drip persisted, a metronome of unease in the quiet moments between the wind roars. Then the rations. He counted meticulously, a habit ingrained by years of solitary postings. A tin of corned beef vanished, then 2 packets of biscuits. He blamed fatigue, the monotony playing tricks, but the gnawing feeling in his gut wasn't hunger. It was suspicion. Cold and sharp sleep became fragmented, haunted by dreams of drowning in the ink-high blackness outside his window. He de-wake gasping, convinced he de-heard footsteps on the spiral iron stairs just outside his door. Clang, clang, pause, clang too heavy for rats, too deliberate. He fling the door open, heart hammering against his ribs, only to find the stairwell empty, echoing with the wind's mournful song through the cracks. The silence afterwards was worse, thick, expectant. He started carrying the heavy wrench from the generator room. Everywhere the isolation began to warp his sense of time. Hours bled into days, punctuated only by the relentless rhythm of the light rotation, the grinding gears overhead, the periodic flash slicing the fog. He found himself talking to the seagulls, their cries sounding less like birds and more like mocking laughter. He reread his wife's last letter until the paper grew soft and the ink smudged. Her words a fragile lifeline to a world that felt impossibly distant. He missed her warm presence, the solidity of her hand in his. Here everything felt fluid, treacherous. The environment itself turned hostile. The fog clung like wet cobwebs, reducing visibility to mere feet, amplifying every sound. The wind wasn't just wind. It was a voice, whispering unintelligible threats against the stone, rattling the shutters like something trying to claw its way in. The constant roar of the sea became a low, malevolent growl, a constant reminder of the crushing depth and utter indifference just beyond the thin walls. He felt exposed, perched on this lonely rock, the lighthouse beam feeling less like a beacon and more like a target. The radio crackled to life one afternoon, a burst of static that made him jump, then a voice, thin and distorted, as if transmitted through miles of seawater. Scary rock, Illy, can you hear us? Hope surged, fierce and painful. He snatched the microphone fumbling. Yes, yes, this is Illy. Who is this? Over silence. Then the static returned, coalescing into a sound that froze his blood. It was a wet, gurgling chuckle, followed by a whisper that seemed to come from right beside his ear, though the room was empty. Alone, so alone, the transmission cut dead. He spent hours trying to raise a response, his knuckles white on the microphone. The silence from the speaker, now deafening. Accusing the dripping sound migrated. It was in the lantern room now, echoing beneath the rhythmic thump-scrape of the rotating lens. He climbed the final stairs, wrench clutched tight, flashlight beam trembling. The massive glass prisms turned slowly, casting monstrous, shifting shadows. The air was thick with kerosene fumes and ozone, and there, on the metal grating near the central column, a dark, viscous puddle slowly spread. It wasn't water. It smelled faintly of salt and decay, like rotting fish left in the sun. He touched it. Cold. Slick. He recoiled, wiping his hand frantically on his trousers. Where had it come from? The roof was intact. There was no source that night. The footsteps returned. Louder. Closer. Clang, clang, clang. They stopped outside his bedroom door. Illy pressed himself against the far wall. Wrench raised. Breath held. The silence stretched, taut as a wire. Then a slow, deliberate scratching began on the thick oak door. Scritch, scratch, scritch, like long, ragged fingernails. Terror, pure and icy, flooded his veins. Was it outside? Or was the isolation finally cracking him open, letting some internal madness claw its way out? The thought was almost as terrifying as the scratching. He didn't sleep. He sat on the cold floor, back against the wall, staring at the door until dawn painted the fog a sickly gray. When the scratching finally ceased, he forced himself to open the door. Nothing. Only the empty corridor and the ever-present damp chill, but etched into the wood, faint but undeniable, were 3 long, parallel grooves his sanity frayed like rotten rope. He saw movement in the fog impossible, shifting shapes darker than the gloom. He heard whispers beneath the wind, voices that mimicked his wife S, calling his name plaintively, only to dissolve into that same wet gurgle. The lighthouse itself seemed alive. The groans of the structure deepened, becoming pained moans. The light S rotation sounded labored, like the heartbeat of a dying thing. He found damp, seaweed-like strands clinging to the lower stair railings. The smell of decay grew stronger, clinging to his clothes. His hair the storm returned with renewed fury on the 22nd day. Waves exploded against the base of the tower, shaking it to its foundations. The light flickered, plunging the lantern room into terrifying darkness for seconds at a time. Ellie was fighting with the temperamental generator when the main power failed completely. The massive lens ground to a halt. The beam died. Utter blackness swallowed the lighthouse, broken only by the frantic beam of his flashlight. Panic seized him. A dark lighthouse was a death sentence for ships. He fumbled with tools, cursing, hands slippery with sweat and fear. The storm screamed outside, a living fury. And then, beneath the cacophony, he heard it. A new sound. A slow, wet, dragging sound coming up the stairs. S-H-H-H-H luck. S-H-H-H-H luck. S-H-H-H-H luck. It was heavy, deliberate. Getting closer, he abandoned the generator. There was no time. He scrambled up the service ladder to the gallery. Outside the lantern room, the wind nearly tore him off the narrow platform. Rain lashed his face like needles. Below, the sea raged, white foam glowing faintly in the suffocating dark. He strained his eyes into the murk. Towards the mainland, he couldn't see. Nothing. The dragging sound reached the top of the stairs inside. It paused at the door to the lantern room. Illy pressed himself against the cold railing. The wrench held high. Heart pounding a frantic tattoo against his ribs. He was trapped. Nowhere left to run. The door creaked open. Not forced. Just opened. His flashlight beam, shaking violently. Cut through the doorway. It stood just inside the threshold, silhouetted against the faint glow from the stalled lens mechanism. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong. Too tall, limbs too long and jointed at unnatural angles. Its skin looked slick, black and glistening, like wet tar or the carapace of some deep-sea creature. Water or something thicker dripped from it, pooling on the floor with that familiar, sickening drip, drip, drip. It had no discernible face, just a smooth, featureless expanse where a head should be. But Illy felt its attention like a physical weight. A cold, alien intelligence focused solely on him. Couldn't he move? Couldn't he breathe? The wrench felt like a toy in his hand. The thing took a step forward, not with a foot, but with a thick, boneless appendage that left a glistening trail on the floor. S-H-H-H-H luck. Then it spoke, not through a mouth it didn't have, but inside Illy's head. The voice was a chorus of distorted sounds, the gurgle of drowning, the groan of the lighthouse, the shriek of the wind, and beneath it all, the terrified whimper of his own thoughts. Alone it resonated, a wave of psychic cold washing over him. We tasted your aloneness. It called to us from the deep dark. So sweet, so empty. Another step. S-H-H-H-H luck. The smell of decay and deep ocean filled the small space. You built your light, the voice scraped against his mind. to push back the dark, to feel less alone. But the dark is patient. The dark is hungry. And loneliness is a beacon. All its own it raised one elongated limb, not to strike, to point, towards the motionless lens. Turn it on, the command was absolute, laced with an alien hunger that made Illy's soul shrivel. Call them to the rock understanding, crashed over Illy with the force of a wave. It wasn't he just him. The thing didn't he want him. It wanted the light. It wanted ships drawn to the false promise of safety, lured onto the hidden teeth of scary rock. It wanted the drowning, the despair, the raw, screaming terror of souls lost in the dark and the deep. It fed on isolation, amplified by terror, and he was the instrument the storm raged. The sea roared, the creature waited, a silent, dripping monument to the abyss that had climbed out of the crushing dark to stand in his sanctuary. Its featureless face seemed to drink in his terror, a palpable energy in the suffocating air. The wrench slipped from Illy's numb fingers, clattering onto the metal grating. The sound swallowed instantly by the tempest. He stared into the void where its face should be, and the void stared back, whispering promises of a feast built on the shipwrecked and the hopeless. Summoned by his hand, the choice hung in the air, colder than the wind, heavier than the sea. Turn on the light, become a shepherd of death, and perhaps survive this night or refuse, and face the dripping, patient thing that had risen from the depths to find him alone. The beam of his flashlight, the only light left in the world, trembled over the creature's glistening form, catching the impossible, shifting darkness within its skin, a darkness that seemed to pulse in time with the frantic beating of his own trapped heart. Somewhere far below, the phantom dripping continued, a chilling counterpoint to the storm's fury, and the silent, expectant hunger of the thing in the lantern room. The isolation was complete, and it was alive. Story 8. The silence in the apartment wasn't empty. It was full of the low thrum of the refrigerator, the groan of ancient pipes in the walls, and the high-pitched whine that lived perpetually behind Daniel's left ear tinnitus. The doctor called it a souvenir from the car accident last year, or maybe it was something else. Lately, the silence felt less like absence and more like a held breath, a predator perfectly still in the tall grass. Watching it started subtly, a flicker of movement at the edge of his vision when he was alone, a faint, sweetish smell of decay beneath the scent of lemon cleaner, only noticeable late at night. He blamed the stress. His mother's funeral 3 months ago had been a quiet, bleak affair. The culmination of years of her slow decline into dementia. Daniel, an architect who found solace in clean lines and logical structures, had been the dutiful son. Now, alone in the echoing apartment they shared for the last 2 years, the weight of her absence felt less like grief and more like a vacuum sucking at his sanity. He found himself staring at the water stain on the ceiling above his reading chair. It had been there since before his mother moved in. A vaguely amoebic shape, the color of weak tea. But now it seemed darker, richer, as if it were absorbing the light, rather than merely reflecting its absence. He climb onto the chair, fingers tracing its cool, slightly damp perimeter. Was it spreading? He took pictures with his phone, comparing them obsessively. Tuesday, 9:14 p.m. Thursday, 10:03 p.m. The stain seemed fuller, more defined. Or was it just the angle, the light, his eyes playing tricks, fueled by exhaustion and leftover grief? The paranoia bloomed like mold in a damp corner. Sounds became suspect. The rhythmic drip from the leaky kitchen faucet. Wasn't tea just water? It was a coded message. The scrape of branches against his bedroom window. Wasn't tea the wind? It was fingernails. He started double-checking the locks on the doors and windows each night. Then triple-checking. He'd stand frozen in the hallway, straining to hear over the frantic drumming of his own heart, convinced someone was breathing just on the other side of the front door. Sleep became fractured, a landscape of jagged nightmares and sudden, gasping awakenings. He dreamt of the stain on the ceiling, only it wasn't a stain. It was an eye, lidless, and weeping viscous black fluid. He dreamt of his mother, not frail and confused, but impossibly strong, her skeletal fingers gripping his wrist with bruising force, her voice a dry rasp. You let them in, Daniel. You opened the door. He'd wake, drenched in sweat. The phantom smell of decay thick in his nostrils. The high-pitched whine in his ear, spiking to a painful shriek reality, began to warp. One afternoon, making coffee, he glanced at the framed photo of his mother on the mantel. A picture taken before the dementia truly took hold. Her smile seemed wrong, whiter than he remembered, predatory. Her eyes, usually a warm hazel, looked flat and black in the photo, like doll eyes. He snatched the frame, heart hammering. Up close, it looked normal again, but the unsettling feeling lingered. The smell of decay intensified. It wasn't sweet anymore. It was cloying, rotten, like forgotten meat behind a wall. He tore the apartment apart, checked under sinks, behind furniture, in the rarely used guest room closet. Nothing. Yet the smell persisted, strongest near the water stain. He bought air fresheners, industrial strength cleaners. The chemical tang only masked the rot for moments before it seeped back through. Thicker, more insidious his isolation deepened. He canceled plans with friends, citing migraines. He stopped answering calls. The world outside his apartment felt alien, hostile. He saw suspicion in the eyes of the cashier at the corner store, a hidden malice in the friendly wave of his neighbor, Mrs. Gable. Was she watching him? Did she know something? He started drawing the blinds during the day, living in a perpetual twilight. The only light came from the flickering screen of his laptop, where he spent hours researching toxic molds, carbon monoxide poisoning, early onset schizophrenia. Each possibility was a fresh horror revelation, arrived on a Tuesday, shrouded in the gray light of a rainy afternoon, driven by a compulsion he couldn't name. Daniel dragged a step stool into the living room. He needed to touch the stain again, feel its texture, prove it was just damp plaster standing on the stool. His face inches from the ceiling. The smell hit him like a physical blow, earthy, fungal, deeply wrong. The stain wasn't just darker. It had texture, a velvety, almost imperceptible fuzz covered its surface. As he stared, hypnotized, a tiny section seemed to pulse, a slow, deliberate throb, like a microscopic heartbeat. He recoiled, nearly falling off the stool that night. The sounds began. Not imagined sounds, but real ones. A soft, wet drip, 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 coming not from the faucet, but from directly above him, onto the armchair beneath the stain. He flicked on the light. A small, dark droplet beaded on the fabric. He touched it. Cold, slick. It smelled like the decay. He spent the night huddled on the sofa, eyes fixed on the ceiling, flinching at every imagined creak and groan of the old building. The next day, Mrs. Gable knocked on his door. Her usually pleasant face was tight with anger. "Daniel, what is that god-awful smell coming from your place? It's leaking into the hallway. And what have you done? My poor mister. Snuffles is sick. Vomiting all night. Did you put out poison?" Daniel stared at her, his mouth dry. The accusation hit him like ice water. Poison. He hadn't tea, but the smell, the mold. Could it be toxic? Was he poisoning his neighbors? His own mind? He stammered denials, slammed the door, and slid down against it, trembling. The paranoia solidified into a crushing certainty. They thought he was dangerous. They would come for him. He avoided the living room entirely now. The drip, drip, drip was a constant, maddening metronome. He started seeing things beyond the corner of the eye flickers. Shapes coalesced in the shadows of his bedroom doorway at night tall. Impossibly thin figures, with elongated limbs, melting back into the darkness. When he snapped his head towards them, he heard whispers, not from the walls, but inside his own skull, sibilant, unintelligible words that seemed to coil around his thoughts, driven by a desperate need for connection. Or perhaps just proof he wasn't entirely mad. He called his sister, Claire. They hadn't spoken since the funeral. Her voice, when she answered, was wary. "Daniel, are you okay? You sound strange, Claire. The apartment. Mom S. apartment. Something S wrong. There S a smell and a stain, and I think it S making me sick. Making others sick. Mrs. Gable S. dog, Daniel, slow down." Her voice was sharp, concerned. "What stain?" "The one in the living room. Mom always complained about that. Said it gave her headaches. Made her see things." Daniel froze. "See things." "What kind of things?" Claire sighed, a sound heavy with remembered exhaustion. "Oh, you know how she got near the end." "Shadows, whispers," she said. Claire paused. She said it watched her. The stain. Called it her little eye in the ceiling. We all thought it was the dementia talking. The doctors said environmental factors could exacerbate it. Old buildings. Damp. Her voice trailed off. "Daniel, are you still there?" He was. But the world had tilted. His mother S. dementia, the little eye in the ceiling, the headaches, the hallucinations. Had it been the dementia? Or had the stain been doing something? Feeding. He remembered the photo, the black eyes. Had it always been there? Had it been with her longer? He mumbled an excuse and hung up, his mind reeling. He stumbled into the living room, ignoring the oppressive smell, the rhythmic dripping. He went straight to his mother S. old oak writing desk. Untouched since her death, he tore through the drawers, scattering papers, old bills, dried up pens. There had to be something. A diary, a note, proof in the very back of the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of faded birthday cards. His fingers brushed against cold metal. He pulled out a small, tarnished silver locket he'd never seen before. It felt unnaturally cold. With trembling fingers, he pried it open inside. Wasn't a picture? Nestled in the velvet lining was a tiny, desiccated piece of something. It looked like a curled, blackened root tip, or perhaps a minuscule claw, and wrapped around it was a single strand of hair, fine, white, unmistakably his mother Essa's. He stared. A jolt of pure, electric terror shot through him. He remembered, not clearly, but in fractured, horrifying flashes. Childhood fevers that came out of nowhere. Nights spent paralyzed in bed, convinced something was crouching in the corner. His mother S. voice, soothing but with an undercurrent of satisfaction. "Hush now, Danny boy. It S. just the house settling. Mama S here. Mama knows how to keep the quiet things happy, and always afterwards, a period of strange calm, a feeling of being watched over, protected, at a cost she hadn't he been suffering from dementia alone. She'd he been tending to something, bargaining with it, feeding it, and the payment, her mind, his childhood terrors, had she offered him, the locket a charm, a binding, or a feeding dish. He dropped the locket as if it had burned him. It clattered on the floorboards. The silence in the apartment deepened, becoming a physical pressure. The dripping stopped. The high-pitched whine in his ear vanished, replaced by an absolute, suffocating quiet then. The whispering started again, not in his head this time. From the living room he crept to the doorway. The armchair beneath the stain was soaked through with dark fluid. The stain itself, it was no longer a stain. It was a hole, a ragged, wet opening in the ceiling plaster, about the size of a fist. Inside, it wasn't wood or insulation. It was a deep, velvety blackness that seemed to absorb the light, and from that blackness the whispers emanated, not one voice, but many, a chorus of dry, papery voices, overlapping, impossible to decipher, yet carrying an undeniable sense of recognition. And hunger one voice rose slightly above the others, a voice he knew, thin, rasping, laced with a terrible affection. Daniel it sighed, the sound like dry leaves skittering across stone. My boy, you found Mama S' little secret. Kept it safe, kept it fed with your fears, your lovely, lovely fears. He backed away, shaking his head, denial a silent scream in his throat. It wasn't dementia. It was never just dementia, the voice continued. A guttural chuckle woven into the words. She made us strong, Daniel. Strong enough to come through a thick black tendril, glistening with the same dark fluid, slowly, sinuously, emerged from the hole. It quested blindly through the air, dripping onto the chair below. It wasn't made of matter, as he understood it. It was shadow given viscous form, smelling of grave earth and spoiled honey. Don T. be afraid, the chorus of voices whispered. His mother S. rasped the loudest. We've always been here waiting in the quiet places, the damp corners, the spaces between thoughts Mama knew. She opened the door. And you kept the key. The tendril touched the back of the armchair. The fabric hissed and darkened where it made contact. Decaying instantly, it began to grow, thickening, branching into smaller feelers that explored the fabric. With horrifying delicacy, Daniel stood frozen, not in the doorway, but in the center of his own unraveling mind, the line between delusion and the monstrous reality that had always lurked beneath the surface of his life had dissolved. The silence wasn't empty. It was filled with the thing his mother had nurtured in the damp dark, fed on his childhood terrors and her own crumbling sanity. And now, the door she opened was widening. The quiet thing was no longer content to watch from the ceiling. It was coming through, and it knew his name. It had always known. The dripping resumed, not water, but the thick, dark ichor from the hole, forming a spreading pool on the floor. The whispers coalesced into a single, chilling directive that echoed not just in the room, but in the hollow spaces of his very bones. Come closer. Daniel, let us see you properly.